All right, everyone, we are live. It is 12 noon Eastern, and we are live on LinkedIn and on YouTube for this special LinkedIn Live, where we're going to be talking to the team at Immerse, including also Brent Kutzerski from HumanWorks, about a new research report that has come out with really interesting data. It is called the Upskill Ultimatum, and it examines the opinions and predictions of knowledge workers and HR professionals on the evolution of training and the urgent need for innovative platforms to prepare companies for the next era of work. So there is a sense of urgency around sharing this data and talking a little bit about the report and some of the things that were highlighted from the report. So I did want to share some more information. It is a report that was conducted among 1,000 knowledge workers and 1,000 HR professionals. So it's a pretty good sample. And they were in the US and the UK. So, a lot of the data is US and UK based. So I think that's important to mention. And then the study focused on sectors like transportation, CPG, pharma, oil and gas, power and utilities, and professional services. So the report has some really interesting data that, in my point of view, is information that people in the business world that are interested in AR, VR, XR, and immersive innovative technologies need to know about, because there's some really interesting numbers that came out of this. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of the findings of the report, I do want to give each one of my panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves briefly. So we're going to start with Tom Simmons from Immerse. So Tom, can you say hello to everyone and let folks know what you do?
I certainly can, Kathy. It's fantastic to be on the panel, and thank you very much for sharing it. I am Tom. I'm the CEO of Immerse and co-founder, and I am very proud to be able to introduce Brent. Brent, could you perhaps say a few words for us?
Happy to. Thanks, Tom. And I don't know if anybody needs to go on mute or not. My name is Brent Kutzerski. I just left Shell after 22 plus years to kind of go off and do some things on my own and with some flexibility in things. So I've known Tom for a long time, working with him through Shell and other organizations. It's been a very enriching and rewarding relationship for me to work with him and his team. Teams that do immersive VR and learning technologies, and I think they really get it. So I'm really happy to do that, because I become kind of religious and a purist sometimes about high quality, really well-defined learning and just not cookie cutter stuff. So I always talk to Tom about, the neuroscience behind the learning and all the other elements to really get people engaged about it. And he always listens, and he's always willing to listen. So thanks, Tom, for inviting me. I always appreciate you and your team. So thanks. That's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent. And Justin, can you introduce yourself and let folks know what you do at Immerse?
Yeah, absolutely. So Justin Parry, I'm COO at Immerse. Tom and I have worked together for a long time. We're co-founders at Immerse, but we've worked together a lot over the years in different companies. As COO, I wear a lot of hats. We're still a relatively small company, so do lots of things. But primarily, I look after the product roadmap for the platform that we've built, and I also run all the teams that deliver content for customers like Shell. So I've got a good insight, but I also get to touch on marketing, sales, all those things.
Awesome. And I did get a comment saying that there is a little bit of echo and feedback.
It's coming from Tom. Tom, you just need to mute when you're not talking.
All right, perfect. So I kind of want to start the conversation by talking about why this report, right? There's lots of news about the big resignation or the big quit, or depending on where you are, it's got different names, right? There's a bit of a talent war of sorts. I mean, this talent wars have been happening for a while, but there's an urgency, right, in the market. And I think this report really highlights the need for more innovative technologies. So Tom, why did Immerse decide to launch this report now?
Well, I think we've all seen, everyone on this call and everyone listening, that the world of work has changed in an absolutely fundamental way. The changes are seismic changes for everyone. And as a company that has tried to consistently push the boundaries, finding better ways of engaging, training, assessing, we thought it was the perfect time to see whether the market was looking at doing things differently. Well, and really take a bit of a sense check on how people viewed these different sort of hybrid working patterns that are coming into force at pace, and in most companies have made absolutely fundamental changes that wouldn't have been imaginable 2 years ago. So I guess it was our sense that it now was the time to really figure out, okay, is this the moment? And are people seeing some of the things that we're seeing with our existing clients, so companies like Shell, for example? So it was really a question of timing, Kathy, fundamentally.
Are there any specific findings that you want to share that you think were relevant? I know that there were a few dates and a few numbers that really stood out to all of us. So are there any specific ones you want to share?
Yeah, of course. I think there's a lot of depth in the report. I mean, it's an extremely thorough piece of research, but I think it's quite useful to talk about some of the highlights that people on this on the call can take away. I think we tried to find a blend between HR professionals, so people that, if you like, do training for a living, people that are in this all day, every day. And then, it was 1,000 knowledge workers that are based across the UK and US, as you said. And I think, so one of the big findings from the HR professionals was that nearly 50% said that they believe that today's training deployment is not fit for purpose, and that's really talking about an existing blend of training, which is fundamentally a mix of what we would understand as e-learning, so some kind of PC, computer-based mobile learning, and learning in the classroom. So there was a pretty, that was half the people thought that wasn't working, was one, a very important stat. Half of the HR of that same group said that there is an emerging skills gap, that companies are not able to meet the evolving needs of their business by either not filling key roles or not responding to the market. So that's also a pretty big stat and concerning. Then the sort of highlights, I would say, on the employee side, and again, quite alarming. And we don't want this call to be some kind of set off panic stations, but there are certainly some elements of this that are concerning. So nearly, again, 50% of employees said they would consider leaving if they didn't get the level and type of training that they were looking for. I mean, that is a very, very big stat, and I think that is directly correlated with the way that working patterns are shifting and expectations of employees are changing, and people are expecting more of their companies. They're expecting more support in a whole range of domains, and they are expecting to be reskilled and upskilled. So I think from an employee perspective, that's something that you can't really ignore that as a stat. Then I think, when we look at the use of immersive technology and how that might play a part, there were nearly 60% obviously speaking today, and some of the people on the call will know that those kind of immersive technologies can really make a big difference. They're certainly very engaging. And so there's lots more detail on those stats, but those are the kind of key trends. But I suppose the most surprising and possibly also a bit alarming headline stat that came out was that it is not until 2027 that most HR professionals are considering changing this well-established training mix. And that is maybe a bit baffling, So we would say, well, what are you waiting for? Because this works and it delivers. So I think that's something that's really interesting to explore. And of course, we're really interested in hearing what Brent has to say about that. We're often on the outside trying to encourage companies to embrace new tech. So yeah, look, it was a fascinating study, and some of these findings were surprising, Kathy, for sure.
Yeah, and definitely the ultimatum part of it and the urgency. Before we go to Brent, I do want to hear from Justin a little bit on why he thinks this information and this report is, it should be relevant and of interest to people in enterprise companies. And like, obviously, Tom mentioned some of the key findings. Maybe you can add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Tom picks up a lot of the sort of the very high level reasons, but clearly, alongside the post sort of vaccine world that we're now living in, there have obviously been a lot of changes that have been taking place over the years around digitalization and the rise of automation and AI and all of these things, which are great opportunities for forward-thinking organizations, but they also pose really big challenges when it comes to workers and skills. And there was a really interesting stat, we use it quite a lot, from the World Economic Forum that said 44% of the skills that employees will need to perform their roles are going to change by 2025, which is really not far away, particularly in the context of the date that Tom mentioned there, of course. And that view was actually backed up from some of the research that we found as well. So 2/3 of the respondents across employees and HR professionals recognized that they're going to need to be more versatile so they don't become redundant, with the degree of change that's taking place. Of course, the pandemic has exacerbated this. It's almost overnight, completely changed the way that we work. And we don't think that's going to be reversed. We certainly see from our own perspective as a company, we survey our employees a lot. We have done since the beginning of the pandemic. And, we found that nobody really wants to go back to the office. In fact, 50% of the people don't want to go back at all. So, we're a smaller company, but, this is indicative, I think, of where we're going. So organizations are going to have to think how they support employee development now that everybody is in this different work context. And, the report shows that e-learning jumped actually during the pandemic, which wouldn't be a surprise because actually it's remotely deployable, it's flexible, and it offers that sort of bite-sized learning, which are all things that I think we can see coming down the line even more now. But from our perspective, I guess we'd be biased, but that e-learning experience is not going to support all of the different training needs that are going to be out there. So that's in itself, again, to come back to that date that Tom mentions of 2027, it feels really far away. And then add to this that half of the employees said that they, as Tom said, that they weren't getting the training that they needed right now. So there's that. And then the other thing that's really interesting, just to build on that, is a sort of follow-on finding, which was in terms of the reasons why. I'm a product technology person, so I'm particularly interested in this stuff. Why is this date so far out? What are the perceived barriers to adoption? We also found that employees' top concerns were, half of employees said that it was about data protection. They were worried about immersive technology because of data, and then 42% said it was because they thought it was going to be too complicated. Which, from my perspective, is perhaps not a surprise, but at the same time, that's sort of things that can be broken down. So I was really encouraged by that, because I think those kinds of, there are good explanations and rationalizations of those things to help people get over those concerns. But what was really, really interesting is that the top concerns from HR, we listed off a load of stuff. We said, is it because the technology is not ready? Is it concerns around connectivity? Is it lack of ROI? Is it, the hardware being outdated too soon? We gave lots of reasons, but there was no one reason that was above 25% in terms of people selecting it. So the really key thing there is that there is no clear reason why this technology would not be being embraced. There was nothing that stood out. So we've got, if I put the things together, it's training's not working right now. Immersive technology could have a huge impact. That's not going to happen for many years, and there's no good reason why that's not going to happen. So it's kind of, that for me is the sort of the summary view.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. Yeah, those findings are just, I'm glad you were highlighting some of the things that seemed, interesting there. I definitely want to go to Brent, because I know you're dying to jump in here and kind of share your perspective on the report and the urgency right now, right? Why have people in the L&D and maybe HR side might have been putting off innovation or change? Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think you have a very interesting perspective.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks for all your help and helping me in getting this thing set up. So I'm going to tell a story, and it's probably taking 3 or 4 minutes, so bear with me. And I'm going to start back in 2011. Two things happened in 2011. In Germany, they launched Industry 4.0, and Shell also launched its Shell Graduate Program and its Shell Advanced Technical Program. Okay, that program was a program designed to what they called accelerate time to autonomy in Shell for their graduates and their experienced hires. So it consisted of, getting people onboarded and getting them a curriculum and a programmatic program to get their competence assured. Okay, that's 2011. So over the last decade, all the companies, big companies like Shell and Exxon and BP and others, they de-risk these digital technologies, okay? So remember, Industry 4.0 had 9 pillars of technology. So it had Internet of Things, it had blockchain, it had big data, it had VR, AR, all those kinds of things. And over the last decade, we did proof of concepts and pilots to de-risk that. And we did that cautiously. So as that grew in industry, we weren't really looking at the employees to say, how is that changing their workflow? How is that changing their skill set? And what we were doing is really leveraging robotics and machine intelligence to do lower order tasks, the unsafe tasks, the repetitive tasks, the tedious tasks, and not any really high level tasks, okay? Now, Gartner just did a report not too long ago, and basically I think 60% of managers said that they don't have employees that are ready to really support the digital transformation effort and the connected worker plant, okay? So you've got all these new technologies, VR, AR, but people don't know how to use them. They're not comfortable with them. And it means that people need to be able to use VR in the field to augment their work, or augmented reality to augment what they see, and, be very comfortable going to and from data sources and all these kind of digital things. Now, a lot of companies like Shell, they try to build digital resiliency, which is basically kind of understanding very academic high level things around digital, but not pragmatic, how do you do your job things with digital. So again, difference between building competence against competencies and assurance and building autonomy. Industry 5 is stepping in now, and it's all about value creation. It's about using the technologies to enable greater value contribution of humans, of their work, and to what industry can do to society. And if you do that, that interjects humans being much more creative, much more intellectual, learning how to think, computational thinking and all these kind of things, and much more social. So now we've got these asynchronous and synchronous social collaboration tools, but we really haven't taught people how to use them, okay? So another stat, if you look at disengagement across all of industry, it's like 70 to 80% worldwide employees are disengaged. I attribute that to a lack of many things, job losses and just corporation kind of tenacity or toxicity or whatever you want to call it, but they're not engaged and they want more control over their work. They want to feel that their work is something they're contributing to and making a difference and it's benefiting them. So this whole idea, what we've been doing for learning for the last 80 years now, it's actually on old antiquated model. It's actually wrong, and I'll say it on this call, okay? What we need to be doing is building autonomy with individuals, because workers want the freedom. They want to build their own personal brands. They just don't want to say, you'll take this training because I told you to, and you're going to do it for your job in the company, and that's it. And I'll evaluate you in 6 months. That's not the employer-employee matrix anymore. It's not the relationship. Employees want to know they're doing good for the company, but they're also augmenting themselves. And so what I'm seeing is we're not investing in the immersive technologies as we could. People still view it as a cost. It shouldn't be a cost. I mean, we invest billions of dollars to turn around a plant. Why aren't we investing billions of dollars to turn around employees for a new industry? We're going to ask employees to be much more creative, much more social, much more intellectual, and work with an entire human-machine collaborative interface. And we're not saying that's a turnaround, and we should be investing in that. So these are the things that I see. And the last thing that I'll say is, employers, the learning of the old days was about, okay, we're going to make a good learning design. And to have a good learning design, you're going to tell them what you're going to teach them. You're going to give them some objectives. You're going to check in with them. You might give them some resources, and you're going to send them out the door. People don't want that now. They want to take their time and attention because it's very scarce today. And even if you can get people's true attention and true time, they want to have meaning of it. They want something that's meaningful and relevant and distinctive and memorable and challenging. And they walk out of that VR or learning experience better for being there, not because it was a checklist by their employer. Okay, so industry really needs to radically understand that you just can't put out e-learning compliance training anymore. You have to look at the larger thing of people's time. They're fighting for it. They're consumed by, distracted by so many things today, and they have such little time. So this is the thing I say. And so when Tom and Immerse and people are driving these immersive, which is what we need, immersive training that gets people in, activates all senses, but they need to do it in a way that's just not old traditional learning design. They need to look at it in a way that builds self-efficacy, which means the person's confidence and willingness to actually want to go out and perform successfully. It's about building value assurance where people say, the cost of me doing this or learning this is really worth it to me. I'm not doing it because somebody's making me. I'm doing it because intrinsically I value my time in doing it. So it's a whole host of things like that. And I can go on and on about all these things. But right now I do feel it's an epidemic across corporate learning in all cases. We're focusing so much on the wrong things right now. We're disengaging our workers, and we're not developing them in ways that are mutually beneficial. And unless we start to do that and use these technologies in the right way, we're going to lose an entire generation. And yeah, the old day was VR is great for if it's dangerous or unsafe, except we have to move past that as table stakes, and we always do that. And we've got to start implementing immersive technologies that match what the connected worker is going to have to do in the field, and it engages their whole brain and their whole spirit. So I'll stop there. I think that might have been longer than 3 minutes, but thanks, Kathy.
No, that was great. I mean, and it's interesting that you mentioned all of these things, because that is part of the premise of my book, The Augmented Workforce, where Tom and Justin are featured in the book, talking specifically very much about what you're referencing. Tom and Justin, do you guys want to jump in and kind of talk about some of the points?
Yeah, look, thanks, Brent, as usual. Very sage words from you. I think a lot of the challenges that we have found is at a very simple level, and maybe it sort of ties back into this that headline stat of waiting another 7 years, is that there's really not any true curiosity just at a basic level just to explore. And what we have encountered often is a kind of fear, maybe of a technology that's not perhaps very well understood. And then I think also perhaps a worry that this kind of hybrid model that's existed for a long time, the e-learning classroom blend, is going to have to be rethought. And of course it does have to be rethought. It is absolutely time for that. And so, sadly for companies like ours, we don't find a Brent necessarily in every corporation, that there is often a kind of slightly risk averse type approach. So I think what we have, partly of what we wanted to encourage through publishing the report, is a kind of a time to really jump in and think about how we can change the environment for the employee, because as Brent says, you have to be, I guess, more trusting, more open. You have to give the employee the ability to make some of their own choices, rather than this very, very prescriptive, structured model. And I think a lot of the solutions that we put in place give a greater degree of autonomy. The employee can come in and interact when they choose. They can come in with their colleagues. They can do something that is more sort of traditional trainer-trainee. So I think these are some of the things that we hope that companies will start to evaluate more quickly now.
I was going to ask, actually, Brent, so your point on autonomy, I think, is really interesting, and I feel like that's been building for a really long time. And there was always obviously this sense that consumer technology was somehow far superior to anything that you get in the enterprise. And so there's always a sort of disappointment, really, really hard to fulfill expectations around, technology experiences in the workplace, because, we've all got these amazing things in our pockets, right? But I think it seems to me that may have reached a critical point now, as you say, where, people are time poor, and they're so showered with all these other amazing experiences that work can't live up to it. And so, what do you think? What's your view on what sort of change would you see there? I mean, I totally buy that. What do you think? What would be the practical steps that would need to happen?
Here's the thing: content today is unstable. Okay, so the half-life of content today is 5 years or so. If you look at autonomy, and if you look at what cyber physical connectivity is doing to the basic pillars of autonomy, remember, autonomy is about task execution. It's about looking and analyzing incoming information to analyze it, synthesize it, evaluate it, and then troubleshoot, problem solve, and ultimately make decisions. Then the third thing of the social aspect of autonomy is collaboration with your peers and escalation, knowing when and when not to escalate. Organizations are totally, in my mind, not addressing that. They're addressing the content issue, okay? But they're not building power skills, of what I call it. And are people better taking this massive big data and these connected technologies and now data from multiple sources, or virtual images from multiple sources, and working in this more connected virtual world? So if I was, advising, I'd be saying to companies, how do we use the technologies like VR, AR, etc., to train people to build autonomous skills in problem solving, decision making against classic scenarios? So, for example, one of the big things in the connected plan is you have decentralized decision making, where somebody in the past could make a decision with somebody sitting right in the control room with them. Well, now you're making decisions with data, and it's a different thing. So again, it's one of those things that, yes, content is great, and your well engineers and your petrochemical engineers and all those people, it's great that they know their craft. But what's really going to differentiate performance is the ability to analyze information and execute tasks and make decisions, that chain. So autonomy is about those core things. And the last thing is, Industry 5 will redefine business models and workflows. So even like simple tasks today, if they're assisted with an iPad or AR or whatever, it's going to change how the worker executes in their role in the task. And what we've got to do, and what we're not preparing for, is elevate people's cognitive, social, and creative levels. We're still asking people to work on the same levels they've always worked when the world around them is circling them. And we're not preparing them. So we need to get a real handle for the benefit of our employees to get them on the right path sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I get that. And do you so the sort of the disconnect between, yes, these technologies can work, we've seen it work, and we have the data from the report to back that up. There is a belief that this can make a profound impact. But this date that's really far away, and then no real lack of sort of clear reason, what would you put that down to? I mean, I know everything that you've sort of mentioned there all comes in. But if you're in HR, if you're in L&D, what do you think the reason would be for saying, well, it's just not going to happen for another 6 years or 7 years?
Well, if you look, for example, I started the Shell story about they cut the ribbon on a graduate program in 2011, same year Industry 5. That program was probably great for them looking backwards of the prior 10 years and all their challenges. It wasn't really great, in my opinion, for looking forward to where we're at today, 10 years later, right? So yeah, they got competence assured of their known competencies, but have they prepared anyone really to work in the future environment and preparing them for those kind of decisions and things? So I think if your question is, why do you think companies are waiting? Is that the question?
No, I think that's probably the question. Yeah,
I think it's unfortunately, we've been conditioned throughout all of our lives to fear the unknown, to fear the boogeyman, the dark, Kruger and Freddy and all those people. If we can't see it, we're afraid of it, right? That's why we're afraid to go around dark corners. I think you have to have people that aren't afraid, because it's their job. And I don't know if companies have enough people that it's their job to push the limits. It's their job to say, I know we got to take care of today, and I know we have to have our license to operate, but there's a future out there, and it just can't be a future on paper. It's got to be a future that we're actually addressing and building towards. I know what I would be doing in companies right now to get them ready for 5 more years. Now, is there a risk? Sure. It's just like any portfolio. If I'm going to invest in, aggressive international stocks, I'm taking a risk. But your management portfolio of investments in learning and people, it has to be a kind of a blended portfolio, and you got to get people ready. And I would take those little things like, how do we got to prepare people to better collaborate? And again, I break it down to the 3 things. How do we get them to be more creative? And that includes innovation. How do we get them to apply more intellectual capabilities? And how do we get them to collaborate socially better? Because those are the three big skills of the future. And you can use VR technologies and others for that. I think what it's going to take is some companies that are just bold and proving it. And that's, I worry about that, because I just can't have the small little companies innovating. I need the big monsters to do the deep pockets. They should be leading the industry, and that's what I worry about. I mean, there was really no international digital transformation roadmap. Lots of consulting companies and everybody had theirs, but nobody was lining up against a big roadmap to say, you're going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of industrial workers in 2022 that need to have these skills. So again, my bottom line is, why does the Gartner report say that 60+% of all leaders say they don't have the skills they need to digitally transform? Somebody was sitting and somebody was not investing in the future. They were investing in just the present. And again, it goes back to, people are afraid. They're afraid, well, what's my return on investment? Well, you know what? Sometimes you roll the dice at the crap game, because you have to. And, again, What they're feeling now is you've got attrition, disengagement. You got people who will now jump in between organizations that they feel it's better for themselves. That employee-employer relationship is dying out. It used to be if you were 5 companies in your first 5 years, you were kind of, what's wrong with you? Now it's going to be, if you're with some company for 30 years, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, I feel like certainly for my generation, the people around me at that time was there when I was, in my 20s. So yeah, it's going to be exacerbated now, that's for sure.
That's a good point, Brent, because when I talk to someone that's been at a job for 10 years, I'm like, what's wrong? Like, why are they still there? Right? In my mind, I'm like, why are they still there? I find it very strange. And we do have a question. I want to kind of address some of the questions that are coming in. And anyone that's watching, please add your questions in. From Theron Williams, how do you propose shifting from the old pedagogical model to the more autonomous I can't even say that. I can't say that. Sorry, guys. Model. So the more autonomous model.
Well, so Brent, it seems that this is probably your specialist subject.
Well, yeah, Malcolm Knowles back in, I think, the 70s wrote a book called The Adult Learner, where he introduced the andragogical model and the pedagogical model. Most people confuse the two models. Pedagogical is about children, andragogical is about adults. That model needs to advance, okay? Because what it does, it has a series of conditions that you want learners to have. And they're the traditional things like, make it goal orientated, make it motivational, make it, clear and purposeful and, different things like that. What I'm seeing now, and I'm writing an article right now to say, we need the good learning designs, but on top of that, we need good experience design elements. We need to build in self-efficacy, which most learning programs really don't build. We need to build in flow. Like the beautiful thing, if I can work with, Tom and others to say, VR modules, what they do is they create moments of flow for people where people get lost and immersive and they don't want to get out of the scenario because they're just finding new things. That's when people really learn, is when they get flow. And the other thing that I believe in a lot is this, expectancy theory. So people in work are all about, can I succeed? Is it worth succeeding? What will it cost me to succeed? And learning and work design, they're not factoring in those psychological things that we know. And people now are going to start to realize the dominance of brain science and brain chemicals on people's life in the job. All these things, dopamine and all these other things, they are like drugs. And some people, if they get in the flow, they want that feeling again. And the next time they go in a learning module and it doesn't give them flow, it's going to be, wah, wah. So, these are the kind of things we've got to do, is there needs to be a little bit more a shakeup of the industry in terms of what we're expecting, because consumer demands are driving this and we're way behind the expectation. My 21-year-old son at Georgia Tech, he'd be shocked. He went to do an internship at a company and he was shocked at them rolling out 3-ring binders. So, it's just, and it was so divergent from his real life that he said, what did I do? Did I walk in a time capsule or something? And companies, and I felt embarrassed for the company, right? So, but again, until companies recognize that that's what's happening in the campuses that, they're trying to recruit from, I don't know, if they're going to get pushed enough to change.
And you bring up a good point, Brent, because when we're going through the, reviewing the study and everything, we talked about Gen Z and like that 2027, like Gen Z is going to be, bigger, not necessarily the biggest, part of the workforce, but they're going to be further in. And, how does, in your opinion, how does the research that was found correlate, to the urgency to change training when Gen Z comes in? Because, what you just explained about your son, like that's a classic example. Like it just does not compute, right?
Well, and here's the thing. Their preferences, their expectations are evolving. I want to be careful here because I don't want to insult anybody, but I was talking to my son about, he's a chemical engineer. And I said, well, would you ever think about working at this company in this industry? And he said, heck no. No good chemical engineer would work in that industry. They're in bad locations, they're dirty, they're X, Y, Z. So their expectations around what they want to do, how they want to spend their time, and this whole new manager mandate, this idea of a leader being the omnipotent single source of authority and righteousness and wrongness is going away. And if that's the case, you've got to have workers that are more autonomous and trusted. So that pyramid top-down approach, the matrixed organization is going to take over the hierarchical organization. And when you do that, you have to have people trained and working in these new models. And again, there's enough research out there that says these new models are already coming out there. And again, look at your exit interviews in companies. Why are people leaving? They didn't like the leadership structure. They didn't like the bureaucracy. They don't want the hassle. They don't like the politics. What they want to do is they don't want to spend 30%, 40% of the time in politics. They want to spend that time developing and enriching and growing and flourishing and fulfilling themselves. So this is the model that's got to change, and all the kind of crap, that's in organizations. We have to replace that with fulfillment and professional grade, emotionally and intellectually stimulating experiences and uses of people's time. And until we get a good handle on that, and training plays a huge role in that, King, I think, Tom, out of your study, the number of people that said they haven't even had any training or development in the last year. How can you be switching across industries and somebody say they haven't had any training or development? And so this is the issue that we've got. And I think where compliance training was given in the past, I think there's going to be greater expectations for true developmental training. And I think you're going to have more and more kids and the whole generation just patching out of organizations because they can do something better with their time, whether that's not work or do something they love or go find a company that offers that value proposition.
There's an interesting thing there, isn't there, about what kind of training people actually want as opposed to the training they're given. And, I guess in your model where you're autonomous and actually you've got to treat people as individuals and they're building their own, they're building their career and their skill set themselves, not for you, not for the organization, but for themselves. There's an interesting thing there, isn't there? Because actually the training they may want may not fit with what you want them to be trained in.
Right. And honestly, what I tell people today when I coach them, I say, you need to build your personal brand. That is number one and first and foremost for you. You need to build your internal and external network. You need to find out what your passion is, what your competence is, and what the market demands and wants. And you need to think about you first. And you're a gig. I mean, don't get married to a company where you're going to invest your entire loyalty and your entire life to letting them dictate to you in the can of soup. You've got to take control of your destiny, and you do that by being very judicious about what you spend your time, interest, and attention on.
Yeah,
that's what's going to happen. I mean, look how many people have to do training that they don't pay attention to because it's not their agenda. You've got to make training in the workforce a bigger part of the person's individual personalized agenda. And you've got to take that content. You can't sheep dip it anymore. You've got to make that content personalized and adapted to the individual because I'm not going to give you an hour of my time. If you make me give you an hour, I'm only going to give you probably 5 minutes of attention. You can have the hour, but you're only going to get 5 minutes of attention. And that's a big difference from the learning productivity concept.
And Brent, we're getting some questions in, so I'm going to go ahead and ask them. One of them says, Brent, have you encountered anyone at the global enterprise level that is doing this correctly in your view?
The answer is no. I mean, and honestly, if somebody can find me a company that is, I'd love to know about it. I know there are pockets of excellence. I've seen some things in the military that they're trying to do. The military is very big about autonomy because historically they've been the best ones at it. They take an 18-year-old recruit and they give them responsibility for millions of dollars or whatever that is. So they're very good at autonomy. I think corporations aren't. Corporations are very good at competence assurance, But that's very different from autonomy. Autonomy is about the person. Competence assurance is about the company. Okay, you're giving managers confidence that that widget of a worker won't get you in trouble. Where autonomy is about, I'm flourishing and enriching a human being, whether they're in and out of my organization, to bring the best of who they are to everything they do. And whole person competence isn't just about their skill set. It's about their traits, their social interactions, their motivations, their interests, all those things. And companies are not doing this for employees today. And I think you're going to see it in more trends in the workforce that people say, I don't need it. I can do something else.
Mm.
We've got two more questions, and I guess anyone. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think maybe, Brent, what you're saying is going to be mildly terrifying for some leaders and for some learning HR professionals, because I think when you say, okay, there's no theory here, we're giving the employee more autonomy, and we're saying actually this is more about creating experiences, and there are none of us have got any manuals in our bookcase where we can say, oh, turn to page 56 because that's where the solution is. I think that is, that is going to be a worry for a lot of people, that you have to be, like you were, very courageous, and broad in your thinking. Do you think leadership and learning professionals can embrace this thinking?
I think they will over time. I mean, you're going to have the bell curve of adoption. You'll have, pioneers, early adopters, late adopters, and, laggards. But if you look, and if we can get some success points in some of these things, using VR to give people such a great experience at accelerating their decision making in decentralized scenarios with multiple sources of information, teaching them that metacognition, all those things, showing employees self-regulation and self-control to say, this is how the world might see you. How can you improve that personal skill? So I think there's a whole host of new skill sets, what's called power skills, that are coming out of all these connected technologies, because it's a different way that people work and interact. Virtual collaboration and all these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, I'm envisioning small steps, just like we did this at Shell. You got to have the research behind you, then you got to get your win, and then you've got to get your champions, and then you go on. Now, I'm not saying boil the entire corporate, organization, but what I would certainly say is let's start with getting VR really leverage what it can leverage in companies. Yes, it's for, unsafe areas and for, it has its model for when it's good, but it also has a great model for higher order things that can really engage the workers. So it's like I said, there's a kind of couple of things that I would be doing, but it's very difficult because you're asking people to change mental models.
We had just to follow up on that point. So in the research, we found 70% of HR professionals said that immersive tech would provide safe training in high risk scenarios, right? So that makes sense, and actually it's kind of consistent with what we hear anecdotally in all our conversations. But what's really interesting about that is, and we had an example of it the other day, talking to one of our other customers. We'd been working with with one of the operational teams through the innovation team, but then we were talking to HR, and interestingly, it seemed that the reluctance was there was an acceptance that hard skills, practical training, high risk, all those sorts of things, absolutely, of course, VR works there. It was actually the soft skills part and all of those, all the kind of training that sits in that area where there is a nervousness and a skepticism, which I just thought, it was really interesting because, and it's backed up here, I think, to some extent, right? Just so we see the sort of, the high confidence in safety training or, training in safe environments, but then a sort of a weird reserve or an unexplained reserve around the more general rollout of the tech.
Yeah, there was an MIT Sloan study that said these power skills, these softer skills, had a 250% return within 8 months on, getting people developed in them.
Yeah.
Now, again, like any study, who knows about the data? But I think the point is, there's a lot of lost value in bad behavior, bad collaboration, and probably, unfortunately, more so than in technical malfunction. Because I think the technical systems have a lot of controls. In companies in Shell, like if there's a technical fault or an error, there's many barriers to prevent that from becoming catastrophic. In the human barrier, emotionally, somebody can do something, have a significant impact on a whole host of people. Take a leader, for example, in an auditorium of 300 people. I mean, that leader with one sentence can disrupt, 60 days of productivity combined of 300 people over 3 hours of mulling over it.
Yeah.
So, it's all how you look at it, but it's what you believe. If you believe in the employee model, if you believe that human power is the propelling power of industry and that technology is great, but it's really nothing without human intellect and collaboration and creativity. I mean, it's what your values are. And this is what companies have to go to. What are they valuing? I value somebody getting learning. So you don't have to give me a return on investment to say, well, tell me in how many months that VR program is going to pay me back. I value a human being coming to me saying, I get developed in this company. The development experience I have are world class and they enrich me.
Yeah.
Good enough for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because we come up against that problem. I think it's really easy to create, a business case and an ROI against something that is a sequence of events that you're trying to learn, right? It's really easy.
I don't know how companies can have no problem having an employee healthcare system or benefit system with vision or, whatever, and they don't have that same benefit to expand someone's mind and psyche and personality.
Yeah.
So it's one of the, I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of companies have these EAP and employee assistance programs. Well, they're a failure mechanism for an employee finally getting so upset and frustrated in the company, they have to seek external help. Well, what would be a preventative measure to that of making sure people are properly coached and engaged and fulfilled at work, right? So, I mean, it's these kind of things that you want to think about. It's, again, it's hard to change people's mental models about how they group, but I hope someday people will just say our big budget, just like healthcare or just like whatever other benefit we offer employees, it's set that we do this. And the only job the learning professionals have is to make most effective use of the investment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the interesting things as well, is that I've always sensed, and obviously you would know this, Brent, but I've always sensed working in the L&D space, a huge degree of frustration. There's a sense of wanting to do things differently. And, we hear this at conferences and when we work directly with these teams, but actually having not been empowered somehow to do it. And I'm guessing it's probably related to the fact that budget is often the first one to go, right, in the tougher times. So it's always, is it, like you say, it's presumably quite hard to build a really truly sustainable program within an organization, right?
Yeah. And I don't know, and maybe the simple model is governments allow people to write off employees like they do capital equipment, because a company doesn't have any problem oiling and maintaining and investing in a piece of capital equipment. Now, again, I wish we felt the same way about employees, that we can put money into changing their filter and oiling them and, giving them a time to shut down and start back up. And that's not viewed as a, sunk cost or, anything like that, or a necessary evil,
Yeah.
And we do have a question from Alex Gibson. He said it's a bit of a selfish question. That's what he said, not me. How can universities position themselves in the enterprise training space in relation to immersive tech? So anyone from Immerse or Brent that wants to take that one?
Yeah, I can. Tom, you might want to. Do you want to do that one?
No, you start and I'll chip in.
Okay. So we've worked with some universities actually in different ways. I'm not going to actually mention names, but there's a few different things. I'm kind of not quite sure what you mean by in the enterprise space, but we've definitely seen universities that have built internal competencies or have teams that are leading immersive technology, educating students, building content with those students, and taking that content to a level where actually it becomes interesting to enterprise. So it's not just about learning, it's actually having an end product that has a value of some sort in the enterprise space. So that's definitely a really interesting thing to look at, because as we move forward, there is going to be this need for more off-the-shelf content. It's the thing that we champion as a company. We won't be able to have custom experiences forever because it's just too expensive. And if you want to hit a big market and move away from people that have got big budgets and be able to cater to perhaps the SME market, then there's going to need to be this kind of off-the-shelf content, and there's going to need to be a lot of it. So there is certainly an opportunity there in universities helping to working with enterprise to identify what that content is, what would be most applicable, what are the good use cases, and then using that as a way of informing their own programs, their own learning. Because obviously it's much better to be building something as a student or as a learner that has a genuine applicability rather than operating in the abstract. So we've seen that, and I think it's really powerful. There's plenty of scope for that, and actually we're sort of we're interested in cultivating those sorts of relationships with universities as well. I don't know if that helps.
I think it's a similar principle as that with enterprise. It's just getting on with it. What's the worst that can happen? It's about encouraging that spirit of innovation. I think what we've seen certainly from the higher education space is that it tends to move even slower than enterprise. But I think we've noticed certainly over the course of this year that there's a definite acceleration because these generations are the ones that are going to have place very high demands on the companies that they are eventually going to join, and they're going to expect, for example, possibly even as early as part of the recruitment process, that there's going to be some kind of immersive tech that's going to be brought to bear that's going to make a specific company, a specific industry, and it's certainly true, Brent, of energy and trying to slightly reinvent itself, make it look more appealing to younger generations. Then there are many things that immersive technologies can do that is going to help draw people in. And so there's a really nice link that will emerge, and we're seeing that beginning to pick up now.
One last thing there actually is that I will mention a name. So there's a Goldsmiths University in London. So they reached out to me last year, and we're looking to get industry folks engaged in the creation of their curriculum. So so that they're actually creating modules that are focused on the kinds of things that industry are looking for, the real skills. And that, I thought it was great. So I went along to like a half-day workshop. There were lots of other people there from industry, and we will walk through it and we could give our feedback and views on it. And that helped shape then the learning for their students, which I thought was brilliant.
Awesome. And we're almost at time, but any last closing remarks from any of you?
Yeah, I would certainly like to thank Brent for his brilliant input into this session. It's certainly brought it to life, and wonderful to have someone who's had such real and deep experience of driving change through technology into Shell, obviously, and hopefully now beyond. So wonderful to have you as part of this group, Brent. It's been really, really valuable listening to you and your thoughts. So
Thanks, Tom. And I've had my pup here on my lap the whole time.
Nice.
Amazingly quiet.
Yeah.
Amazingly
Good
quiet, I have
girl.
to say. Justin, Tom, Brent, thank you so much for being on this LinkedIn Live. Anyone that's watching, we have a link to the report in the comments. You've also seen it in the little scroll bar in the bottom. So please go download it. There's some really interesting data. Share it out if you think it's relevant. There's some really interesting numbers for folks in the VR, AR, and business industries. But thank you again for your time and an enlightening conversation.
Great. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Brilliant.